What is up, guys? Randomodium here. This is your Week 1 analysis for Fantasy LCS for the 2017 Spring Split. In this video, I'm going to go over all of the matches for NA and EU LCS. I'm also going to be talking about my EU LCS strategy for when you want to draft players, because EU LCS players this split are not as valuable as the NA players, because not every week do the EU teams play 2 matches. So this is going to be my strategy for when you should pick them up, when you should play them, when you should bench them, and when you should get rid of them. So let's get into that first. So first up, you can see that I've got the teams in the vertical axis, and then in the horizontal axis, I've got the different weeks. So the blocks that are in purple, those are the weeks that those teams have 2 matches in that week. So for example, G2 and H2K, they've got 2 matches in week 1, and they've got 2 matches in week 4. The green blocks, that's when you want to pick up those players. So G2 and H2K, those are the only players that I'm recommending that you draft in your initial draft. So basically you're just going to be picking up the players 1 week before they're actually going to be useful. So that way that you can actually kind of, jump the gun compared to everybody else in your league. Because everybody's going to want to pick up these players when they have 2 matches that week. So you want to try and think ahead, anticipate, and pick them up 1 week prior to when you actually need them. The blocks that are in yellow are the blocks where you're most likely going to be benching those players, but you're going to keep them on your team, but you're going to keep them on the bench because they only have got 1 match that week. And then the blocks that are in red, that's when you're going to drop those players from your fantasy team because they don't have any more weeks where they have 2 matches that week, so they're not going to be as useful after that point for your fantasy team. So G2, H2K, you need to pick them up in the draft phase. You're going to play them in week 1, you're going to bench them in weeks 2 and 3, you're going to play them again in week 4, and then you're going to get rid of them in week 5. Unicorns 11 Misfit, you're going to draft them in week 1, you're going to play them week 2, you're going to bench them week 3 through 5, you're going to play them again in week 6, and then you're going to get rid of them in week 7. Splice and Fnatic, you're going to draft them in week 2, play them in week 3, bench them week 4, play them again in week 5, and then get rid of them in week 6. And then Vitality, Giants, Rocket, and Origin, I would wait until week 6 before you pick them up. They do have 1 week where they've got 2 matches, either in week 2 or week 3. If they're performing really well, you can pick them up that week, but it's not as efficient because you're going to basically just pick them up, play them a week, and then get rid of them again. So only pick those guys up if they're doing really, really well. And that really also is the same is true for everything else, right? You don't have to pick up these players if they're not playing well. Like if Misfits doesn't play well in week 1, I'm not saying that you should still pick up the Misfits players. Use your judgment, use some common sense. This is the general strategy, but don't pick up players if they're not playing well. Don't pick up teams if they're not playing well. I'll try to give you some information week to week on which players and which teams you should pick up, but this is the general overarching strategy you should employ for your EU players. Okay, so let's talk about the nomenclature for the next couple things I'm going to be talking about with week 1. So if the win-loss is in white, that means I think it's going to be a normal game with normal amounts of fantasy points. If the win-loss is in red, that means I think it's going to be a stomp. That means that the game is most likely not going to last very long, which means that the winning team is not going to get as many fantasy points unless they really stomp the team. And the losing team is going to get no fantasy points. So you definitely want to avoid those teams that have the red L's next to their name. And then if the win-loss is in blue, that means I think the game is going to be very, very close, and it might be an upset. These are the games that create the most fantasy points for both the winning and the losing team. So both teams get a lot of fantasy points. The winning team gets the highest amount of fantasy points out of anyone, but these games are also higher risk. So the losing team on these blue games may not get as many points as the winning team of a normal game. So it's higher risk, but it's also higher reward. So definitely keep an eye on those blue games, because those blue games usually create the most fantasy points. Alright, so I'm simplifying things this split. I'm trying to minimize the length of these videos, because I understand a lot of people don't have time to watch 30-minute videos or 60-minute videos. So I'm trying to simplify things. If you have more questions, please ask them. I'll be happy to answer them. And if you guys want more detail in these videos, let me know, and I'll make them longer and more detailed. But I'm not going to break it down by position. I'm not going to break it down by player, because in general, how the team performs is how the player performs. So if the team performs well that week, then generally every single player on the team performs well that week. So you can't really go wrong with a certain player unless that player is playing really bad. So my S tier teams this week are G2, CLG, Cloud9, and H2K. G2 is going up against Fnatic and Roccat. I think the Fnatic game is going to be close, but Fnatic has a lot of roster changes while G2 does not. And this early in the split, that's really important. And I think that's why G2 is going to win. I also think G2 is a slightly better team than Fnatic. And then I think the G2 versus Roccat game is going to be an absolute stomp. So I definitely think that G2 is going to win that one. CLG probably has the easiest week out of anyone this week. They're going up against Liquid and Envy. I think that because of all the roster changes on both those teams, I think CLG is just going to absolutely dominate them because CLG hasn't really had any changes. So I think this will be a good week for CLG. Next up, I've got Cloud9. They're going against TSM and Dignitas. The TSM game is going to be incredibly close, but Cloud9 usually gets off to a stronger start than TSM. TSM usually is a little bit slow out of the gate, and they usually pick up steam as the split rolls on. So I am giving Cloud9 a slight edge. I think it's going to be a very close game. It'll most likely come down to a coin flip. It'll be 3 games. But it'll be really fun to watch, but I do think the Cloud9 is going to edge out TSM in week 1. And then the Dignitas game, I think Dignitas is a very talented team, but they haven't had that much time to practice with each other. So I think the Cloud9 is going to be able to beat them just because they have more familiarity with each other. So I think the Cloud9 is going to rely on that to get the victory against Dignitas in week 1. And then finally we've got H2K. I think they're going to stomp Origin in their first game, and I think that the H2K versus Splice game is going to be incredibly close. But I do think that Splice is going to get the victory in week 1 because Splice hasn't had any roster changes. H2K has. I think that Splice is going to just be slightly better in week 1. We'll see what happens when they match up later in the split. Okay, moving on to the A tier teams. I've got TSM. They're going up against Cloud9 and Immortals. This is a really hard week for TSM, and traditionally TSM is they're not as good in week 1 as they are in the rest of the week. So let me put it that way. TSM is a great team, but they usually are a bit slow out of the gate. So I think that they're going to lose a very close match to Cloud9. I think that they will beat Immortals in another close match, so that will give them quite a lot of fantasy points. If they wind up winning both their games, I think that they could be a top point scorer, but I think that's a really risky proposition. I'm not saying you should bench TSM players, but just understand, don't be surprised if they're not the top fantasy point scorers this week. I think this is just a really hard week for them, so don't freak out if your TSM players don't top the charts this week. Next up, we got Immortals. They're going up against Echo Fox and TSM. I think that Immortals will beat Echo Fox and that they will lose a close match to TSM. So that gives them, decent fantasy points. They should be around that A tier. And then my last A tier team, I've got Dignitas. They're going up against Phoenix 1. I think they will beat Phoenix 1. And I think that they will lose to Cloud9 just because they haven't had as much time to kind of gel together. So, but I do have high hopes for Dignitas. I think they'll be a good team this split. So they'll be a solid A tier this week. B tier, these are the teams that are actually kind of, not very good in NA, but they're going to be beating out a lot of the EU teams just simply because they've got 2 matches this week, and they're going to win probably at least one of their matches. So even if they lose the other match, they'll probably still get more fantasy points than the EU teams, which is why they're B tier. It's not necessarily because I think that they're great teams. It's just because they play more matches than the EU teams, which is why they're going to get more fantasy points. So Phoenix 1, they're going to be against Echo Fox and Dignitas. I think they'll beat Echo Fox in a very close game. And then Dignitas, I think they're going to lose, but they should get, somewhat good fantasy points. Envy, they're going to be against FlyQuest and CLG. I think that they will beat FlyQuest, and they're going to lose pretty badly to CLG. and Liquid is going up against CLG and FlyQuest. I think the same thing's going to happen. They're going to beat FlyQuest. They're going to lose really badly to CLG. Moving on to the C tier teams, I've got Echo Fox. They're going against Phoenix One and Immortals. I think they will lose a close game to Echo Fox, and they will lose pretty convincingly to Immortals. But that gives them just a little bit of fantasy points because it will be a close match against Phoenix One. FlyQuest, they're going to lose both their matches. I think they'll be the lowest producing team for NA this week. And then moving on to the EU teams, I think that Misfits, Splice, and Unicorn to Love, these are going to be the guys who get the most fantasy points out of the EU teams that only have one match this week. There's the potential that some of these teams, or at least one of these EU teams, will get more points than FlyQuest or Echo Fox, but they're not going to get a huge amount of fantasy points just off of one, best of three. And then finally the D tier teams. I have Vitality here as a D tier team and Fnatic as a D tier team. That's because I think that they're going to lose. They could potentially be a C tier team if they upset either Unicorns Love or G2 respectively. But, I'm not saying these are bad teams. Again, I'm just saying that, they're getting shot in the foot because they're only playing one match this week. And I think that they're going to lose their one match, so I have nowhere else to put them but D tier. Please don't hate me. I'm not saying that Fnatic or Vitality are bad teams. It's just the way the system works, and I hate it. And then finally, the bottom D tier teams, I've got Giants, Rocket, and Origin. I think they're going to all lose their one match this week, so they're not going to get that many fantasy points. I think Rocket and Origin are going to get almost 0 fantasy points this week, so definitely avoid those teams. So that's my breakdown for week 1. Let me know what you guys think about it. Let me know what you think about the new system. If you prefer it being, shorter and sweeter, or if you want me to go into more detail, really break down every single position, every single player, all of that stuff. If you want a longer video or whether you prefer a shorter video. Additionally, just a public service announcement. I am going to be insanely busy in the next couple months. I've got so much stuff that's going on in real life. I'm transitioning out of the military. I'm going to be searching for a job, so I'm going to be traveling a lot. I'm traveling a lot for my current job. I'm going to be going to Europe for a couple weeks. I'm going to be moving once I actually get a job. So there's a lot going on in the next couple months. So I'm going to be trying to put out as many videos as I can. I'm not going to try to compromise the quality of my videos, but I'm going to really rely on you guys to give me feedback, to let me know if you feel like these videos are rushed. You gotta let me know, and I'll devote a little bit more time and maybe space out how often I put out the videos. If you don't like the video, or there's a particular video that you want me to make, you gotta let me know, because I'm not gonna be able to put out as many videos as I would like in the next coming months. So let me know what your priorities are, and I'll try to prioritize certain videos. My next video that I'm working on is my Zon lore video. So that's going to be the next video I'm going to put out. I'm a little bit hesitant to put this video out yet because they only posted 3 champion bios and then 1 additional story. And that's not a lot of material for me to actually create a video off of. I would like to have a couple more character bios that I can talk about in a video. So I might wait until they release a couple more character bios. If they don't release them in the next couple of days, then I might just post the video anyway, even though it's only going to be, it's going to be a shorter video. And then the other video that I'm working on is for the skirmishers. So I'm going to be doing a video on every single subclass. It seemed like skirmishers were the class that people wanted me to do the video first on. If there's another subclass that you would like me to prioritize, let me know, and I'll do that class instead. But skirmishers right now is the subclass that I'm going to focus on for the first video. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you like the content on the channel, please subscribe. Please give me your comments, your feedback. I really rely on that to keep putting out high quality content. And I love reading your guys' comments. And I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Randomonium signing off.